Hello and welcome to the Crimson Misery Podcast, episode 42. My name is Will Rainbolt. I hope you all are doing well. I know I'm doing kind of well because the brackets are out. The brackets are out on both the men's and women's side. Um, yeah, I'm very excited to break this down. I'll give my initial thoughts, and then we'll break down the brackets. I'll do a little bit more of an in-depth, like perfect bracket type for the men's side, and maybe the women's side if I feel comfortable for it. I might just wing it on the women's side, to be honest with you. Just go with my gut. But on the men's side, I'll have a little bit more of a breakdown, what matchups to look for, what trends to look for, especially. So we'll see what ends up happening there now that the matchups are set. But in the meantime, if you are listening on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, consider rating the show 5 stars. If you are listening on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment down below, and let's get right into it. So I'm going to first bring up the games that happened, the final auto bids that were clinched today. Florida left no doubt that they were the last one seed with an 86-77 win over Tennessee. They left absolutely no doubt, and they just look like one of the best teams in college basketball right now, 30-4 right now. Memphis as well, winning the American Athletic Conference over UAB, 84-72. Dane Danger playing some of his best basketball that he's ever played. 22 points, 12 rebounds, 5 blocks. The fact that Musa Cisse also comes off the bench for Memphis most games is pretty incredible. To have that protection for Dane Danger as well. PJ Haggerty as well is playing some great basketball, 23 points. We'll see if Tyrese Hunter can get healthy for the tournament. That would be pretty great. Although guys like Nicholas Jourdain and PJ Carter, Colby Rogers have stepped up a little bit more um, in Hunter's absence. So we'll see what ends up happening there. Michigan won the Big Ten Slugfest, the Mudfest, I should say, against Wisconsin, 59-53. I predicted this would happen. Um, I didn't realize this would be the game that would end up in the 50s. I said George Mason VCU was going to end up in the 50s. No, somehow VCU and George Mason scored more points than both Michigan and Wisconsin did. Um, was not expecting that. VCU, by the way, won the Atlantic 10 over George Mason. It was a pretty good game overall because George Mason, despite VCU having the lead for most of the game, George Mason still had a chance to tie it and send it into overtime potentially. So it was a great game. Yale as well defeated Cornell 90-84. That's another team I'll get into in a little bit. But with Michigan, um, they were not playing well in the regular season, but they did win the Big Ten tournament. Somehow they are seeded, despite only having one fewer. Like Wisconsin is 26-9. Michigan finished ahead of Wisconsin and was, uh, yeah, 25-9. Michigan's a 5 and Wisconsin's a 3, which does not make a ton of sense. But I will get to that. I will get to that seeding in a little bit. So let's just take a look at the bracket right now. So, the way I want to do this is I want to create this was the bracket I will call my podcast bracket. But for right now, I'm just going to use it as a template for what was surprising, what was not so surprising. I predicted that Duke over would leapfrog Auburn for the number one overall seed. That was not the case. Apparently, I mean, the committee obviously felt that Auburn did enough to get the number one overall seed despite going 1-3 in their last 4 games. That being said, though, Auburn is still really talented. There's a really good chance that they go pretty far in the tournament, but I will get to who they face in a little bit. Yeah, Duke is the 2 seed, the second overall seed. Then it's Houston in the Midwest. So I mean, I should say Auburn is in the South, Duke in the East, Houston in the Midwest, and Florida in the West. So yeah, Not too surprising, although Florida traveling out west is a little bit of an issue in terms of, the top two seeds really, both Florida and St. John's being on the East Coast traveling west, would be in a very interesting matchup. So yeah, that being said, um, yeah, the one seeds pretty much were exactly what I thought they were going to be. Same with the two line. I don't have, yeah, I mean, pretty much got those seeds right. Wisconsin as a three, that's a bit of a surprising one to me. Um, yeah, I think maybe, I think that's right at least for now. I think Michigan, however, should have been a four at the very worst. Them being a five just really goes to show how much of all tournaments, like of all conference tournaments, like the Big Ten tournament just seems to not matter. Um, and in this case, with Michigan being two seeds below Wisconsin, despite beating them twice, is pretty eye-opening. But not as eye-opening to me as Arizona being a four. That is way overseeded. Oh my God. Maybe it was because of them beating Texas Tech, who's a three seed in this tournament. They're a three seed in the West. Arizona four seed in the East, so they will face Akron in the first round. I should say Wisconsin faces Montana. I look, I mean, Akron really had to fight back against Miami of Ohio on Saturday. Again, I don't trust Arizona as far as I can throw them. I have said that numerous times. Um, there are a couple of regions where the 5-4 like the 5-12 and 4-13 matchups in that sub-region. I think there are quite a few regions that the 12 and 13s could both be advancing. That's my first takeaway. With the matchups that I'm seeing right now, that is very, very likely to happen. Um, and I'll get to what I think when I go matchup to matchup. But let's move on to the bubble teams that got in, the bubble teams that got out. So the committee, headed by Bubba Cunningham, who is the athletic director for North Carolina. I know that if you're affiliated with a school, you're not allowed to be in when the selection committee is discussing that team. I understand that. I just find it very, very, very suspicious. And a lot of people found it very suspicious. And especially when he was on with his co chair on CBS and giving non answers to those questions, that like seemingly like everyone on Twitter um, was just their suspicion levels were even more like highly raised. Um, and they got in over Indiana. They got in over West Virginia, another team that got snubbed. I think I had West Virginia. Okay, here's the thing. I said West Virginia should be more toward the bubble than a lot of other teams. I still had them over North Carolina and Texas. I had them at Xavier level, and Xavier got in. Um, the fact that West Virginia has six quad one wins, though, and both Xavier and North Carolina have, I believe, um, it's like three or four combined quad one victories. Um, that's and North Carolina having one of those quad one victories and a quad three loss at home to Stanford, right? So that is really for West Virginia fans especially, like I feel bad. Because again, I thought they were a bit the bracketologists were being a lot more favorable to West Virginia. Um, Especially with Tucker DeVries out. But I still like you put in North Carolina over them? Seriously? And especially like at least I mean, look, I said Indiana was probably out, right? I've said that numerous times. And yet it still stings as an Indiana fan. Um And Indiana still had a better like quad. If you look at just basically like quad one victories, they had zero losses outside of quad one. They had a lot of losses too, like North Carolina, but they had more quality wins. They had, wins at Michigan State and against Purdue. So that those two victories are better than any victory North Carolina had all year long. But I think Net obviously had more of a role to play. North Carolina's non-conference strength of schedule was obviously a lot tougher. That is a big reason why I was pretty disappointed with Mike Woodson scheduling um, a very, very easy non-conference outside of the battle for Atlantis. That I believe is probably what ultimately doomed them. And also aside from losing games to Northwestern and Iowa, which obviously did not help either. Um, so what does that leave me with? My overall thoughts: the Mike Woodson era is over. Re-enter the new era with Will Wade or whomever that they're going to go after. Mark Byington, hopefully not Brad Brownell. Um, I don't think he'd take the Indiana job, honestly. I wouldn't really want him to. But that being said, let's just hope for the future. It sucks that they're not in the tournament. It sucks that they didn't even get into the first four, but you know, it is what it is. And I'll still try to have a good March Madness, even though that is still very suspicious that North Carolina got in. Like, and Texas as well, because Texas was also considered out by a lot of bracketologists, and they are in. So obviously, I believe there was a little bit of SEC bias as well. Um, Especially with where quite a few of the teams were seeded, like Oklahoma being a bubble team and getting a 9 seed, it was very interesting. And the same seed as Georgia, which is very odd to me. Um, yeah, so very, very curious about that, but I guess it is what it is, and I just have to move on and break down this bracket. So, um, things to watch out for. Again, the teams that I personally do not trust are Arizona and Wisconsin earlier on. Of those two teams, I think Wisconsin has the highest ceiling of the two. But again, I Tommy Lloyd has not really proven himself to win a lot of big games. He's made the Sweet 16 twice, granted, but he has been, I think, every single loss Arizona has had in the NCAA tournament under Tommy Lloyd has been to a lower seeded team. So very, very curious what ends up happening in the game against Akron, or if Arizona ends up moving on. Because Akron, is a little undersized, but I like Akron in that matchup. Like being undersized doesn't mean you're going to lose automatically. Like we saw Purdue losing to freaking Fairleigh Dickinson, right? So, and Arizona was way taller whenever they lost to Princeton. So I'm not buying that schmuck from that smut rather from Seth Davis and others, but um I'll get into that in a little bit. I'll give my uh uh game by game predictions for the NCAA tournament. Um Another team that I don't trust right now because of injury is Iowa State, because Sean Gilbert is out for the rest of the season. So that is a big loss for Iowa State. Now, that said, I do think they could be able to beat Lipscomb, although that's not going to be an easy game because Iowa State, again, they are not fully healthy. I thought if they were fully healthy, I think this would be a much easier path for them. But I'm just it's not looking great for them right now because he is one of their main engines, and without him you're losing a lot of depth, and you're having to rely a little bit more on, I mean, Taman Lipsy and Curtis Jones, Milan Momcilovic, they can do really well, but Gilbert is kind of the piece that holds them together. So that is a big loss for Iowa State. And obviously, Kentucky, another 3 seed in the Midwest region. Without Jackson Robinson, and it's obviously going to depend on if Lamont Butler is going to be healthy. I think it's best to wait and see what the status is on a lot of those players. So yeah, I think yeah. So apparently he is reported to be healthy. Lamont Butler is, and that is big for Kentucky, and another reason why I think Kentucky got a pretty favorable draw overall in their region. But um, yeah, I think there are a lot of teams that I'll be looking at for for um, for injury updates, especially with Kentucky and Iowa State, um, Texas Tech as well with Darian Williams and Chance. It's like all the three seeds are like dealing with some sort of injury, which is pretty funny. Aside from Wisconsin, and I trust Wisconsin like the least of the three seeds, which is kind of funny. But um, anyway, so with that being said, I guess now we uh, we let's go before I get into the women's bracket next. So let's do this. So, in the South region, we have Auburn facing the winner of Alabama State and St. Francis, Pennsylvania. I mean, it's pretty obvious who I'm picking there. Auburn will advance. Despite losing uh, three of their last four games, they're way too talented to lose to either one of those squads. Their shooting is just going to overwhelm either of them, and plus they have plenty of athleticism to make up for it. I'm going to do this based on region. So I'm going to do just one region first, and then I'll move. So I'll do the South first, then the East, then the West, then the Midwest. So that's how this is going to work. A matchup I was really surprised to see is Louisville and Creighton. So this is going to be in Lexington, Kentucky. So you might think that I'm going to pick Louisville in this matchup, right? And that's the 8-9 games are very, very difficult to pick because of that reason. Um, but I like yeah, I just with Creighton, have a really difficult time picking against them. Um, but again, I think with Louisville obviously losing to Duke in the ACC championship game. I think they possibly got a little underseeded. I think they got kind of an unfair matchup here because Creighton is a really, really, really good team. But with that being said, of those two teams, I know it's close to home for Louisville. I might go with Creighton here. And I think if you're like me and you want to fill out like 25 different brackets, I think it's good to mostly like split it in half. But I think Creighton is very likely to pull off the upset. Terrence Edwards and Chucky Hepburn, Nolan Waterman, sorry, I think is going to have a bit of a difficult time against Ryan Kalkbrenner. Creighton has a lot more experience than Louisville does. I just think that's a pretty favorable matchup for them. So yeah, but God, that's a tough matchup, and I'm going to be saying that a lot. Um, do I want to change it? No, no. Okay, so moving on. Yeah, I have Auburn and Creighton meeting in the round of 32. So Michigan and UC San Diego. UC San Diego, I said was the most likely to pull off an upset um, against Michigan of all teams. And while I'd love for that to happen, it depends obviously um, on Michigan and how Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden end up playing a lot of experience there. And UC San Diego, of course, the first time that they've been eligible for the tournament in both the men's and women's side, and both teams ended up getting in. So a very, very interesting choice to be made there. And again, as much as I want, I guess, was UC San Diego not in on the women's side? Okay, maybe not. Maybe I misremembered that. Anyway, Never mind. But on the men's side, they got in. So yeah. Anyway, um, because because Michigan's guards are very inconsistent. I like Trey Donaldson quite a bit, but in the grand scheme of things, um, I feel like UC San Diego is a very likely upset pick, but I don't really like picking Michigan in this particular matchup. Um, oh man, that is a tough one. That is a really tough one. As much as I hate to pick it, I think I'm going to go with Michigan here. Um, but again, I would not blame you at all. UC San Diego is going to be a really big upset pick, but yeah, I'm just not seeing it happen with this Michigan team in particular. Now, this is an upset that I will pick. Yale against Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M, they have yes, they've beaten Auburn, the number 1 overall seed in this tournament. I get that. Yale and Texas A&M, however, play a very, very similar style of basketball, and I like they are very physical for a mid-major like Ivy League team. Um, Nick Townsend, he's been very good throughout the year. Um, John Polakidis had 25 points. He can shoot the three. Bezenbang had 15. He can also hit threes. Trevor Mullen comes off the bench. He can shoot it. They have so many shooters. Yale does, and I feel like they are less susceptible to how Texas A&M makes a lot of teams feel uncomfortable. I also don't trust Buzz Williams um, as other people do. He's a good coach. Don't get me wrong. I just think Yale pulls off this upset um, because I think I mean a lot more inconsistency with Jerk Phelps, and Wade Taylor. Although those guys are going to be pretty big if Texas A&M ends up holding on. Um, yeah, I just it's a tough call, but I think Yale is going to pull this one off, and we'll have a reunion between Danny Wolf and Yale. So that'll be pretty interesting. So and then North Carolina, I've already talked about before. Um, Either North Carolina or San Diego State, and I just think because God hates everyone, North Carolina is gonna probably win this game, first 4 game against San Diego State, then beat Ole Miss, and then just make another surprise run to the national championship game as an 11 seed. Because why not? I, no, but like in all sincerity, like Ole Miss to me, I think is a 6 seed that is very curious to me because they've played very well in the SEC to get a 6 seed, and also they're just like I hate picking against Jamin Brakefield and Sean Padula and all those guys. It's just a really tough game to pick against. So and 11/6 matchups are incredibly popular. I get it. Um, but I don't see North Carolina, who has struggled so much against quad one opponents. I just can't, in my mind, picture North Carolina. They could very well beat San Diego State, and I think they probably will. If San Diego State wins this game, I think it's kind of the same deal that Ole Miss is just a better team overall. Um, that Chris Beard has. Yeah, I can't pick North Carolina or San Diego State against Ole Miss. I just think Ole Miss is the more talented squad right now. And then Lipscomb versus Iowa State. This is going to be an upset pick that a lot of people are going to make now that Kashawn Gilbert is out for the remainder of the year. There's a very good chance that Lipscomb does end up beating Iowa State here. And it really does depend on the guys who, because Iowa State is not the deepest team in the world either. So it could be very likely that Lipscomb does end up beating Iowa State here. And you know what? Let's party. Let's fucking party. Lipscomb moving on against Iowa State. Let's do it. I know I hate to do that because I actually like this Iowa State team, but and there's a good chance that Iowa State ends up pulling this one out. But I have to take some risks going with a perfect bracket and all that. Um, because this will be obviously the perfect bracket. So yeah, I have Lipscomb moving on against Iowa State, and then Marquette, New Mexico. Oh, oh boy. Two teams that are vastly different. New Mexico is very good on the defensive end, and obviously Donovan Dent is gonna be he's gonna show out in this one. Marquette played better against Xavier in that win, especially having to come back and beating them, but then they kind of fell flat against St. John's. I just I Marquette on paper is the more talented team, and that's very and it's hard to pick against them, but they're a team that loves to play down to competition and just seemingly make every game as close as possible. And they're very infuriating to watch for that reason. And I feel like Shaka Smart has had better teams not do as well. Um, I and again, the 7-10 games are increasingly as well. They're very difficult to pick. Um, but for some strange reason, I feel like Marquette is going to win this game. Um, I just have this weird feeling. Um, I know New Mexico can easily win this game. And again, kind of like if you're filling out a lot of brackets, like kind of divvy it up a little bit. But I just have a feeling in this particular case, Marquette, I would favor over New Mexico. So, and then Michigan State over Bryant. I think Michigan State is the clear. Michigan State is one of my favorite teams in this tournament. So that's who I have moving on against Bryant. I don't really see Bryant pulling off the upset, but um, crazier things have happened, but I just think Michigan State is such a matchup nightmare for a lot of teams. So, anyway, moving on to the round of 32, we have Auburn versus Creighton. Um, as much as I would love Creighton to beat Auburn, I just don't think that's happening. Um, Auburn is just too deep, too physical. Creighton, despite Kalkbrenner and Stephen Ashworth and Jemai Neal, like I don't really think um I really do not think that Creighton will be able to pull off this upset. Even though even though if it does happen, it'd be hilarious. Like don't get me wrong, but like yeah, even still I have Auburn winning this game. And then Michigan and Yale, I'm going to do it. Yale moving on to the Sweet 16. At this point, like I just think and I think Yale matches up overall pretty well with with um with Michigan. And I know Danny Wolf is gonna have the reunion if that ends up happening, but it also sets up an Auburn Yale rematch from from last year. Now, do I think Yale is going to beat Auburn again? No. I mean, Auburn's a much better team than they were last year, and I think Chad Baker Mazara is probably going to have a school. So unfortunately, I do have Auburn going to the Elite Eight. I'm not that crazy, but like I do have Yale going to the Sweet 16. Ivy League teams have made the Sweet 16 before. I believe what was it in 2010? I believe Cornell made the Sweet 16. Um, yeah, in 2016. Um, that was with Steve Donahue's head coach, correct? Yes, it was. Um, so yeah, it's happened before. That Cornell team beat both Temple and Wisconsin. Hey, look at that, Wisconsin um, choking again. How about that? Um, anyway, so that's that's kind of my overall feeling on that particular region. And then Ole Miss and Lipscomb. As much as I would want Lipscomb to move on to the Sweet 16, I just think Ole Miss is a little too talented. Um, Yeah, with Brakefield, I think he can definitely have his way. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised with how good he is in this tournament. Um, and I say that as then like North Carolina is probably going to somehow beat them. Like just watch that happen as soon as it does. So and then Marquette, Michigan State. Yeah, I don't think that's much of a choice there. I just think Michigan State's the much better team, and I think Marquette both undersized and just inconsistent. I don't think it's gonna happen. Like I really don't. So yeah, I have Michigan State moving on, and then Ole Miss, Michigan State in the Sweet 16. Um, Michigan State. I have Michigan State moving to the Elite Eight against Auburn. I think this is going to be a classic one versus two matchup. Auburn and Michigan State. Not every region is going to be have a one versus two. I think this might be the only region where this is the case. So yeah, I think it might be. So yeah, Auburn, Michigan State, and I want chaos, a little bit of chaos, so I think I'm going to pick Michigan State. I just like them over Auburn because I think they match up pretty well. I think their guards can, especially with Trey Holloman and Jaden Akins and Jace Richardson, I think are able to match up with Auburn's guards pretty well. And then down low, Michigan State has quite a bit of depth to slow down Janai Broom. So if it does get to that Auburn Michigan State matchup, I think Michigan State has a pretty good shot at beating Auburn, and I think they will. Um, yeah, so Michigan State out of this South region, I believe will go to the Final Four. Okay, moving on to the East. Duke versus American or Mount St. Mary's. Yeah, Duke. Now, keep in mind that Malik Brown and Cooper Flag are hurt. Cooper Flag is expected to be back. I'm not sure about Malik Brown. So that is definitely something to consider. Um, yeah, so I don't. Um, yeah, I don't know his status. I think he might be out for at least the start of the NCAA tournament, so that is something to definitely keep in mind. But Duke still won the ACC tournament without Cooper Flag and Malik Brown, so and Cooper Flag is coming back. So Duke still is a really good basketball team. Do not let that fool you. Do not let the injuries fool you again for Duke. So, and then Mississippi State and Baylor. Mississippi State is another team I don't trust. Um, and Baylor has, I feel, the more high end talent than Mississippi State does. I know Josh Hubbard is a really, really good player. He's their superstar on this team, but I just like Baylor in this matchup for some reason. Um, so yeah, I think I am going to go. I'm going to go with Baylor. I'm going to have a Baylor Duke matchup. It'll Jeremy Roach is going to have a reunion with Duke. This is like the tournament of reunions almost. So, all right. Anyway, with that being said, let's move on to Oregon versus Liberty. I still don't. I don't fully trust this Oregon team all that much. They have really good players and they have really good wins, but I feel like this is just another matchup that is destined. I feel like this region is destined to have um, both the 12 and 13 move on. And I think that's going to happen. I don't trust Arizona. I think Akron has a good chance to win this game. I have both Liberty and Akron moving on. I'm crazy, I know, but like I literally in this particular region, I could see both. Yeah, I can see both Liberty and Akron moving on. Now, of the two, okay, I want to just back up a little bit. Of the two teams, Oregon and Arizona, that are most likely to move on, I think it's Oregon actually, and not Arizona. And the reason I say that is because there's still some pretty good experience on this Oregon team. Um, I trust Jackson Shellstad a little bit more, even though I've said before I don't fully trust Oregon's offense all that much. But with that being said, Akron and Liberty in this bracket that I have are moving on to the round of 32. So VCU, BYU. I don't think BYU is going to have a repeat of last year. I actually do think BYU is going to win this game, even though it's against another Atlantic 10 team. BYU lost to Duquesne last year, and this year they're playing VCU, who's a very good team, uh, albeit with a little bit of offensive struggles. And defensively, I just think BYU matches up pretty well with this VCU squad. They have quite a bit of depth. Um, and the Atlantic 10 was really nothing special this year outside of the VCU and George Mason. So, and yeah, VCU the only A10 team to make the tournament. So, in a weak year, I just have BYU moving on. So, Wisconsin, Montana, as much as I don't trust Wisconsin, I do have them beating Montana to go to the round of 32. So it'll set up a BYU versus Wisconsin matchup. And then St. Mary's Vanderbilt is a really tough game to decide because Vanderbilt obviously has better wins overall than St. Mary's had on the year. That being said, St. Mary's on paper, I just think they are so physical and they can make so many teams uncomfortable. So while I really, really do respect and love the job that Mark Byington has done in year one, going from James Madison to Vanderbilt, I could obviously honestly see Vanderbilt winning this game, but in this particular case, I'm going to go with St. Mary's. Um, uh, Augustus Marcellonis, um, really one of the best guards in the entire country that not a lot of people are talking about. I just think and the way that St. Mary's rebounds, I think that's going to be a very, very difficult thing for Vanderbilt to overcome. Although, again, as I said, I could definitely see this happen for Vanderbilt winning. So, and then Alabama versus Robert Morris. If there was a 15 over 2 to happen, and in this particular year, I don't really see a 15 beating a 2. If it did happen, though, I think it could be Robert Morris over Alabama. But I still don't think Robert Morris is beating Alabama. I have Alabama moving on. But I'm just saying, like, of all the 15 over 2s, Robert Morris, I think, is the best 15 seed in this tournament. But they also happen to be facing like one of the best two seeds in the tournament. Now, but that being said, it may depend on if Grant Nelson is healthy. This might be a time where you may need to look at the updates of Grant Nelson if he's going to be ready for this game against Robert Morris. Because if not, then it might be a little bit of a sneaky 15 over 2 pick. And although I don't see it happen because Alabama is way too talented, I think, with their shooting and their interior defense is still decent, although not great. Their guard defense is almost non-existent. Um, but yeah, I just think Alabama is going to beat Robert Morris regardless of that. Um, Nothing too crazy from the bottom of this region. And then St. Mary's against Alabama. Again, it depends on if Grant Nelson is healthy, but I do think Alabama ends. I think it's going to be a pretty close game. Either way, if Alabama faces Vanderbilt or St. Mary's, I just have Alabama moving on to the Sweet 16. Should probably go to the top of the region first, but I'll say this: BYU is beating Wisconsin. I don't trust Greg Garden March. I think this BYU team is very fun to watch. I just like BYU against Wisconsin. I think BYU goes to the Sweet 16. So actually, the second six seed moving on to the Sweet 16, which is pretty rare, all things considered. So I just have a feeling that's going to happen. So going back up to the top of the bracket, I think Duke is going to beat either Mississippi State or Baylor. Um, whichever one advances, I think Duke is pretty much a given for. And then Liberty versus Akron. I could easily move. I mean, Liberty is a very, very interesting team to pick because they have some really good wins this year. Especially, I mean, they've beaten teams like Kansas State on the road. For Akron, um, their best win is probably in conference, which isn't great, but I'm just like the momentum just seems to be screaming Akron to me. Um, Liberty, I could maybe see winning this game. It could be Duke versus Liberty in the Sweet 16. But oh, that is a tough call. Um eh, I'm going back and forth right now. Uh, just because I want it to happen the least, it's probably going to be Liberty. So yeah, Duke versus Liberty in the Sweet 16. Um, but if Oregon does advance against Liberty, then I might go with Akron. So you know what? Fuck it. Let's do Akron. Let's just do Akron. I'm going. It may not be a perfect bracket, but I want it to be at least a good bracket. And I feel like this is a year that quite a few upsets will happen. Um, so yeah, that's what I have happening here. So in the Sweet 16, BYU I think is going to beat Alabama. Yeah. So here's the thing. BYU has the shooting to compete with Alabama, and I think their defense is better than Alabama's definitely is. So, yeah, I just think that this team will be able to neutralize a lot of the shooting, especially from Mark Sears and Chris Youngblood and LeBaron Philon, uh, Jaron Stevenson. Like, I just think BYU with Richie Saunders and Dalen Hall. I just like BYU in this matchup. They have so many other shooters as well, which is just like I'm very curious to see if BYU is able to beat them. And I think they will. I think BYU is gonna make a run this year. I just feel it in my bones. I have them in the Elite Eight. I have them facing Duke, although it'd be very, very cool if Duke was able to if Akron somehow, some way ended up beating Duke, but I just don't see that necessarily happening. And then I have Duke. Unfortunately, I would really like BYU to upend Duke, but I just don't see it happening. I think this Duke team just can take away so much from you, and I think for me, Michigan State in from the South and Duke from the East is like pretty tame in comparison to like it's almost chalk, but I do have a lot of upsets. I have higher seeded teams advancing. And I'm like and I have reasons for why this could be what ends up happening. But yeah, Duke over BYU in the Elite 8. I have Duke in the Final 4, Michigan State in the Final 4. In these bottom regions, however, this is where shit starts to get insane. So, let's start, I guess, with the Midwest. Because quite, I have quite the journey that I want to take you all on. So, Houston over SIU Edwardsville. I think that's pretty obvious. Gonzaga in Georgia is where it's very interesting because Gonzaga is playing with a lot of momentum. Um, and I think on paper they're the better team overall, but this is kind of against the grain. I am going with Georgia. I'm going with Georgia over Houston or Georgia over Gonzaga. Um, and the reason is I think the high end talent from Mason Newell, Silas Demery, there's a chance Blue Kane might hit some big shots. Um, yeah, and I just it's a tough call for sure. But playing in the SEC, they've been playing better recently down the stretch. I just think Georgia in this particular matchup is one that people should be like. I don't automatically assume Gonzaga is going to be advancing. They've been inconsistent this year, and same thing with Georgia. But I just think Georgia with the higher end talent, especially with a future NBA player in Asa Newell, I think Georgia could potentially win this game. So that's who I have advancing from that particular matchup from Gonzaga, Georgia. Clemson versus McNeese. Now, this is a really tough game to predict. Clemson is coming off an Elite Eight. I think they are more talented than they were last year. And obviously, you have McNeese, led by Will Wade, who is one of the best, like, high end talent matchups. Oh, that's so tough to pick. As much as I want to pick McNeese, I think I'm going to go with Clemson. And High Point is another pretty interesting upset pick. They are a matchup nightmare against Purdue. And I could easily see High Point pulling off this upset. And I think in some brackets that you make, High Point should be an upset that you consider. And a team that I really have a feeling could pull this upset off, but for some reason, Purdue just I don't see this as an upset. Um, I think Purdue's winning this game. I think this is the yeah, I guess the lower regions are actually the only 5-4 matchups that I actually have both advancing. So, kind of a spoiler alert for Memphis and Maryland. Although I'll get to that, I'll get to the West region in a bit. Um, and then I have Purdue advancing against Clemson, mainly because I just think but that's again, that is a tough call. Actually, no, I have Clemson advancing against Purdue. I changed my mind. Um, with Victor Locken and Ian Shefflin against a pretty beat up Purdue backcourt, I think Purdue is able to beat. I think Clemson beats McNeese, and then I think either High Point or Purdue, whoever wins that game, I think Clemson ends up advancing. Although I could easily see McNeese winning. This is why it's so difficult to predict March Madness. So, God, this is going to be a long podcast episode. Um, yeah, so Clemson, I think, just has the edge over Purdue. Although, if Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer and CJ Cox end up going off, then it could be another instance where Purdue ends up pulling it out. But I just don't see it happening. I think Clemson's going to win. Are you ready for what I'm about to do? Are you ready for what I'm about to do? You better be ready for what I'm about to do. Um, well, actually, yeah, we are balling in this region. Georgia over Houston. Let's go. Again, I had a very weird feeling this Houston team, although they won the Big 12, they they have this like Jawan Roberts also I think he's back for this tournament, but like Houston is, I think, the first team I think they're the first one seed that goes down overall. Looking at all the one seeds, I think Houston is a team that goes down first. And that means Georgia is going to beat Houston. All right. Are you ready for that? Because I'm ready for that. Holy shit. Yeah, I don't know why I just did that, but look, Miles Uzan, Jawan Roberts, LJ Cryer, they're a very talented trio rather. And I think they're fully capable of making a deep run, but as I said, they haven't like the eye talent, like it just hasn't been as impressive as the other ones. And I just think that whoever wins that Gonzaga Georgia matchup, and in this case I have Georgia, I think has a decent shot at beating Houston. I think Georgia actually has a better shot at beating Houston than Gonzaga does, to be honest with you. Um, I just think Georgia has enough talent to win a game like this. So we'll see. It could be, it could very well be uh, Houston's region to lose, but I just have a Georgia Clemson matchup in the Sweet 16. I should probably go down to the other subregion. So Illinois versus the winner of Texas and Xavier. I think Texas will end up winning this one. I just don't see Xavier winning this one, although they do have talent. Just like Texas overall, just with Tremont Mark and Jordan Pope and Trey Johnson, Arthur Kaluma. I just think Texas overall is the better team. And I think they do end up beating Illinois, to be honest with you. Yeah. I look, I Illinois is going to shoot a lot of three-pointers in this tournament, and I think that's going to be their downfall, quite frankly. So, and why do I say that? It's because I think they've gotten by a few games recently with that, with they're shooting a little bit better, especially with Kasper Jonas and Will Riley. But I don't trust this Illinois team, so I'm going to end up picking um, the winner of Texas over. I assume I think if Xavier wins, then Illinois can definitely win. But in this case, I think Texas moves on to the round of 32. Um, yeah, so now Kentucky against Troy. As much as I want to pick Troy over Kentucky, I just don't think I can right now. Um, and then yeah, Utah State I have over UCLA just because I've not been incredibly impressed with UCLA. I know Utah State lost to Colorado State um, pretty badly, but I do think Utah State ends up pulling this one out. Um, Even though, like, if UCLA does win, I think either case Tennessee beats both Wofford and um, whoever wins the UCLA Utah State game. I just I don't think Tennessee is gonna. I mean, especially because they've been playing a lot better. Um, I think their shooting has been on the up recently, and so I definitely think Tennessee can at least make a Sweet 16 run. Where in this case, I have them facing drumroll, please, Texas. I think Kentucky, they've been bitten by the injury bug a lot. I just think Texas is going to advance to um, to the Sweet 16, where they will face Tennessee. And I mean, as much as I want chaos, I think Tennessee they have had two wins over Texas already. I just think Tennessee overall I think I have them as an Elite Eight squad right now. So yeah, they will face the winner of Georgia Clemson, which is like a national championship game in football matchup, right? So a lot of it's a very interesting pick. Um, oh man, that's a tough call. Um, wow. Wow, very like I'm sort of going back and forth as to who I think will win this game. I I just think with their experience and I think their ability to both defend and play well on the offensive end, I think Clemson ends up winning against Georgia. Although I could see it where Georgia, if Asa Newell plays pretty well, they could end up uh, pulling off another upset against Clemson. So, but in this case, I have Clemson and Tennessee in the Elite Eight, and who do I have in the Final Four? Why, it's none other than Clemson. I think, as much as I want to pick Tennessee, I just think at some point their lack of shooting and their streakiness of shooting is going to catch up with them. That is why I have Clemson moving on to the Final Four facing Duke. Um, yeah, I just think Duke and Clemson in the Final Four. It's going to be a really, really good game because Clemson is the only team in the ACC that has beaten Duke this year. But I'll get to the Final Four matchup in a second because we have one more region to cover. So let's move on to Florida versus Norfolk State. Norfolk State is kind of a shiver me timbers with Missouri fans, but in this case, I think Florida ends up moving on. Um, UConn versus Oklahoma. Oh boy. So in most brackets I make, I'm probably going to advance UConn just because I think their talent level is much better than Oklahoma's. But with Jeremiah Fears, I think um, Oklahoma, I just don't see Oklahoma winning this game, to be honest with you. I think it's going to be Florida and UConn in the third round or the second round in the round of 32. That's why I have UConn moving on. Although if Oklahoma somehow has a really good shooting night, um, yeah, maybe they pull off the slight upset, but I just think UConn advances in this particular matchup. And then I know a lot of people are going to be picking Colorado State in this one, but I think Memphis is going to move on against Colorado State. I really do. And then Maryland, I have over Grand Canyon. I think Maryland's starting five is one of the best in the country right now. I know they lost to Michigan in a bit of a heartbreaker, but yeah, I have Memphis and Maryland, both Memphis and Maryland moving on. So a lot of upsets in that particular region, in the top two regions, but in the bottom of the bracket, not as many. At least in the 12v5 and 13v4 matchups. But this is as much as Drake is a very interesting pick, right? Because Missouri has been slumping recently, and they've played well in many games this year, but but um I'm going with the upset pick over with Drake over Missouri. Ben McCollum um has done a fantastic job. First year as Drake head coach, coming from D2, bringing so many of his players, especially um God, I mean, it's hard to bet against a guy like Bennett Sturts. Um, but that being said, Missouri, it's not like a done deal because Missouri is a team that can shoot very, very well from three and has plenty of high end talent on their front court. Um, yeah, I just, it's very, very weird to see like this particular matchup because while I want to pick Drake very much, like Missouri, and especially um like Tamar Bates and Caleb Grill, um, and what's his name? I'm blanking almost. I almost said Dylan Cruz, but he plays for the Orioles. Um, what's his name for what? Um, Jacob Cruz. Yeah, Jacob Cruz. Um, a lot of shooters on Missouri. Um, But that being said, I think I am going to pick Drake in 11 over 6. And as much as I want to pick Texas Tech over UNC Wilmington, this really depends on if Chance McMillan and Darian Williams come back. Um, assuming they are, um, so yeah, well, given what we know now, um, it doesn't appear as if they're going to be playing right now. Um, yeah, so yeah, both Williams and McMillan, um, they're still good without those two guys, but I would want them to be fully healthy. Um, man, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Because UNC Wilmington, um, obviously, um, I like um, I like coming. Obviously coming off the winning the CAA, obviously, there's a good chance that they could pull off another 14 over 3 if and only if McMillan and Williams are not in the lineup. If they are in the lineup, Texas Tech wins. If not, UNC Wilmington could very much pull off the upset. Either way, I am going to advance Texas Tech. But either way, I think in this particular case, regardless of if Missouri or Drake ends up winning, I feel like and especially in this case because it's Drake, I think Drake can win against Texas Tech, especially if those two are not healthy. Um, I'm gonna say that right now. So that, but again, like I hate to do it because I've loved Texas Tech this season, but they've just had so many injuries. So, um, although there might be some brackets I make where I do have Texas Tech going far, and again it depends on if those guys are healthy. Because if so, then Texas Tech could easily go to like the Elite Eight. I wouldn't go that far because St. John's is in this region, but anyway, um, yeah. So we have Kansas versus Arkansas. Kansas 7, Arkansas 10. Uh, yeah. Um, especially because Boogie Fland is back. I could easily see Arkansas winning this game because Kansas has struggled against good teams this year, not just like mediocre teams, but they struggle against like every good team that Kansas plays, they always struggle against. And I think this is going to be the case here. Arkansas over Kansas, a rematch of the round of 32 2 seasons ago. And then I think St. John's beats Omaha. It's going to be a John Calipari, Rick Pitino reunion. And uh, I don't really see Arkansas winning against St. John's. I think this is if this were any other uh 10v2 featuring Arkansas, um I think Arkansas could have a pretty good shot at winning, but this is St. John's and their defense is absolutely dynamite and yeah, I just have St. John's winning this one. Um yeah, I don't have Arkansas winning. I think the magic of John Calipari is just kind of gone at this point. They have really good talent, but St. John's just has enough to beat either Kansas or Arkansas. So, um, or Kansas and Arkansas, and then yeah. So, anyway, Florida versus UConn is going to be a very interesting matchup because UConn UConn's offense is still very elite, but their rim protection is terrible, and Florida is just so much size that it's almost impossible to pick UConn at this point. So, and then the 5 versus 4, I have Memphis moving on against Maryland, and there's a reason for this. I think Tyrese Hunter at this point in time, um, yeah, I think he will be back um, in if this ends up holding. Um, yeah, he's not ruled out for the tournament. So, yeah, I think. Oh wait, that's that was Dante Harris. So, yeah, it doesn't really say if Tyrese Hunter is going to be available. I assume he's available. Um, uh, uh, well, this is a bit of a this kind of is dependent on if Tyrese Hunter is going to play. Um, and he's limping. He has a walking boot. Uh, yeah, maybe not. Although Steven still like it's tough to pick against um wow, that's tough, man. That's really tough. Um yeah. Um I know I'm like pausing a lot, but I guess Maryland then over Memphis. Although let Memphis cook a little bit with especially with Dane Danger and PJ Haggerty. It's yeah, I just can't ignore how good Maryland's depth is, and like Penny Hardaway. Maybe it's best not to not to trust Penny Hardaway at this point. Although, like I do think Memphis can be able is able to beat Colorado State, but I just have Maryland in Florida in the Sweet 16, and then you ready for this? You ready for this? I think Maryland can beat Florida. I really do. I think Florida ends up losing in the Sweet 16 in the West region. Um, whether it's Memphis or with Maryland, I think either team could I think either team could beat Florida. I think Florida goes down in the Sweet 16. I think that's a pick that not a ton of people are gonna end up having in their bracket. I think a lot of people will have Florida going to the Final Four with how hot they've been recently. But I have a little bit more of a reservation. I think their defense is a little bit more suspect. I think Maryland is going to be able to hang offensively with with Florida or Memphis for that matter. But in this case, Maryland, just because Tyrese Hunter not appearing to be healthy, so I do have Maryland going to the Elite Eight. How about that? Who will they end up playing in for the right to go to the Final Four? Will it be St. John's or will it be Drake? You ready for this? It's gonna be St. John's. As much as I want to pick Drake, um, in the 11 versus 2, I just with this Rick Pitino led St. John's squad, I just really don't see St. John's losing to Drake. Although it would be a cool story. I just don't see Drake making it past the Sweet 16. St. John's is such a good team, and Rick Pitino has this team playing at such a high level that it's going to be really difficult to win against them, especially with Kadari Richmond and Ejiofor and Wiltshire. It's going to be really RJ Lewis. I mean, it's going to be really difficult to beat them. Um, so then we have Maryland against St. John's. As much as I want to pick Maryland, I have St. John's going to the Final Four. It'll be um, again but again, it depends on if Maryland's guards have a good shooting night. Um, if Gillespie and Rodney Rice and Miguel can have good shooting nights, but I just think St. John's is going to be so physical against Maryland that it's going to be nearly impossible for them to be comfortable against a St. John squad that is just so good this year. Um, so for the Final Four, my matchups are Michigan State and St. John's, and then Duke and Clemson. So St. John's versus Michigan State, Rick Pitino versus Tom Izzo, two of really like of the coaches remaining because so many coaches have retired, whether it's Roy Williams or Mike Krzyzewski or Tony Bennett or Jim Boeheim. Um, Leonard Hamilton's retiring, is now retired, and Jim Larrañaga retired. Um, I mean, those are the two coaches, Patino and Izzo, that are just so um, that are pretty much like two of the only like remaining um great head coaches. I mean, maybe you could put Rick Barnes in that category. Same with John Calipari. But aside from that, it's really a lot of the new blood that's here now. Um, so yeah, in this case, as well as if you if anyone has noticed, there is no SEC team in the Final Four, which is pretty funny. Um, yeah. Another thing I should mention is that for a lot of the other Big Ten schools, aside from Michigan State, who I think has the highest ceiling, I don't trust a lot of the other Big Ten. So, of the other Big Ten teams. So that's all I have to say there. Yeah. So in this particular case, Duke, although I do want to pick Clemson in this matchup because they have the win over Duke, it was mainly because it was at Clemson. I just think Duke is going to be winning this one. And then Rick Pitino versus Tom Izzo, I think St. John's. I'm going to pick St. John's over Michigan State. And then for the national championship, Duke with expecting Cooper Flag to be healthy against a St. John's team that makes so many teams uncomfortable. This is going to be a dogfight if this matchup ends up happening because both teams are so good defensively that it's going to be still hard for Duke to get a ton of stuff going, although Duke is clearly the better offensive team of the two. Um, man, it's going to be so difficult. Um, this is so tough, man. This is so tough. Um, yeah, I can't pick against Duke. I'm sorry. I can't. And then combined points, I just think, yeah, I just think Duke, healthy Duke is just able to take away so much from you. And I just think with their size, they're just going to be able to match up against St. John's pretty well. So yeah, I have Duke over St. John's in the national championship game. I'm putting the stamp on it. I think there will be a combined 100 and mm, I say the score probably is in the low 70s, I would say. So I think the tiebreaker for points, I'd go 145. 145, somewhere around there. So yeah, though that is my podcast bracket. Duke wins the national title over St. John's. Yeah, that's my matchup there. So, yeah, let's move on to the women's side then. That's basically my prediction for the national championship game. Obviously, that is just my own personal opinion. Yeah, to recap, St. John's, Michigan over Michigan State in the Final Four, and then Duke over Clemson in the other, and then Duke over St. John's. So there you go. So much to talk about. This podcast has already gone over an hour long, so and we still haven't even gotten to the women's side yet. I'm going to basically do the same thing on the women's side, although this should be a little bit quicker because not as many upsets happen, of course, on the women's side. Couple of surprises. Especially Notre Dame getting a 3 seed is very surprising. I guess it makes a little bit more sense looking at the twos. Um, Duke and NC State are both on the two line. Both teams I like quite a bit, although it's really funny to me. Duke and Lehigh are playing. If for anyone remembering, CJ McCollum and Lehigh in 2012 defeated Duke with when they had Austin Rivers and the Plumleys. I believe Mason and Miles Plumley were on that team, and Austin Rivers and Quinn Cook. Um, yeah, that's a pretty funny game, especially because it's another 15 over 2. That's really funny. Um, do I think it'll happen this time? No, because I mean, for those who are not familiar, how the women's team works, it's not at neutral sites for the first 2 rounds. You have the uh, the top 4 seeds host. So Duke will be the host for this region. They're not losing to Lehigh on in Cameron Indoor Stadium. Like, I'm sorry, that's just not happening. Although it would be really, really funny if it happened. I just wanted to point that out, just in case it does happen. Um, it would be absolutely hilarious for that to happen. So yeah. But let's start off. I mean, the 1 seeds are what I expected. UCLA, South Carolina. South Carolina, notably not the number one overall seed. Um, I think they're. I mean, UCLA getting the number one overall seed, I think makes sense. Their only 2 losses are to USC, the another 1 seed, the final 1 seed. So it makes sense. But South Carolina. Definitely, I mean, being on the second overall seed isn't disrespectful, but at the same time, a bit of a question mark, I would say. Indiana is the 9 seed in that region in Columbia. So if they are able to beat Utah, which I'll get into that in a second, they would face South Carolina again for the second consecutive year. What do I think will happen? Oh, gee, I wonder what. I think South Carolina is going to destroy Indiana. There's my prediction. So anyway, but let's get right into it. So yeah, not I won't be having a ton of upsets in this one. I'm not gonna lie. as much as I did on the men's side, because again, it's just so difficult to say that teams are going to be upset on their home floor because it just doesn't happen very often. Um, Especially last year only when Middle Tennessee was the only double-digit seed um, that ended up advancing past the first round, basically. So yeah, uh, in that case, UCLA will win. I uh, basically for this entire tournament, I have basically all the ones advancing past the round of 32. I have all of them in the Sweet 16 at the very least. So Richmond and Georgia Tech. Richmond have some pretty dynamic scores, especially with Maggie Dugan and Rachel Ulstrom. Um, Richmond it could be a pretty sneaky pick over a Georgia Tech team that has played pretty well in the ACC overall this year. They've had pretty close games against the Dukes and the NC States and the North Carolinas. But I have Richmond moving on against Georgia Tech. I have them playing UCLA, and I think UCLA will win that game. Ole Miss versus Ball State. Um, Another pretty interesting matchup because Ole Miss, obviously, they have Madison Scott and Kennedy Todd Williams, who have played very, very well. They've lost a lot of their higher end games, but I think they can beat Ball State, who, I mean, MAC tournament champions, but at the same time, I just don't see Ole Miss losing this one. And I have Baylor also beating Grand Canyon. Florida State, I have beating both George Mason and LSU. I think Florida State's going to pull off the upset against Kim Mulkey and LSU. Um, Tania Lotson, one of the best scorers in the country, I think leads the nation in scoring, uh, at least in the Power Five. And I'm not entirely sure what the status is of a lot of LSU's better players, especially Flau'jae Johnson. I just think Florida State is going to pull off the upset in the round of 32, even if it is at LSU. I just really want that to happen as well. So, Harvard, Michigan State. I actually have Harvard pulling off the upset against Michigan State. And then, won't you believe what I'm about to do next? I have Harvard going to the Sweet 16. Yeah, that's right. NC State is a really, really good team with Zoe Brooks and Isaiah James. I've talked at length about how really good they are. It's going to be really difficult for Harvard to do it, but I think Harvard can make the Sweet 16. Um, Again, it's not going to be easy, but I just feel like they have the talent to pull that off. So I have that matchup: Florida State and Harvard. I think Florida State um, will end up beating Harvard to advance to the Elite Eight. I have UCLA against Florida State, and guess what I'm about to do? I have Baylor beating Ole Miss, by the way. Um, do I want to do that? Um, that's a tough call. Yeah, I think I have Baylor moving on, especially if it's at Baylor. I think they'll be able to beat Ole Miss. I have UCLA, however, defeating Baylor. And as much as I want to pick Florida State over UCLA, I just don't see UCLA losing to the Seminoles. I think it's going to be a pretty good game overall. Um, but yeah, I'm just not convinced Florida State's going to be able to beat UCLA. But I do have a six. I have a few upset picks in this region, so more than maybe I should. But anyway, let's move on to regional two. Utah versus Indiana. Um, it's going to be tough to beat. It's going to be tough to defeat Utah, especially with Gianna Nipkins averaging. I think she's averaging close to 20 per game. But that being said, I think Indiana might be able to pull it out. Um, I hope so, and just for my sake, I want Indiana to do at least. I want the school to at least win one tournament game, right? But they're not beating South Carolina. Whoever wins the Utah Indiana, whoever wins any matchup in the 8-9 is losing to the one seeds. I think that's pretty much a given. So Alabama Green Bay. I have Green Bay. I think Green Bay is going to beat Alabama. Um, Alabama hasn't been incredibly impressive this year. They do have a win over LSU at home that was only by 3. Um, they also have wins over Michigan State and Ole Miss, and yet I just feel like Green Bay. Um, I don't know. I just have a weird feeling that Green Bay is going to pull off the upset against Alabama. They've been in the tournament before. I just feel like this might be the year that they end up pulling off an upset over Alabama. So Maryland and Norfolk State. Guess what I'm about to do? I have Norfolk State upsetting Maryland. That's right. I have Green Bay and Norfolk State playing for the right to go to the Sweet 16 to face South Carolina. It may not even matter because South Carolina is just going to win that game probably, but Maryland has been bitten by the injury bug as well. So if there was one team from this section where I would pick to go to the Sweet 16, it's probably Alabama. But in this case, I think Green Bay and Norfolk State will be able to pull it out, and I think Norfolk State ends up getting the win over Green Bay. I think they could even beat Alabama. I have Norfolk State going to the Sweet 16. How about that? How about that? They may lose to South Carolina, but it's still pretty funny to see. So yeah, I have Norfolk State as a 13 going to the Sweet 16, only to lose to South Carolina. They're just way too talented. Despite maybe not being as talented as they were the past couple of years, I still think they're well on their way. So and then kind of similarly with North Carolina, I have them advancing at least to the Sweet 16. I think Duke and North Carolina on the women's side going at it in the Sweet 16 is going to be pretty interesting. Now that North Carolina is healthy, though, I have North Carolina. It's going to be a South Carolina North Carolina um, Elite Eight matchup. But first, I mean, I think West Virginia with JJ Quinterly, they could cause some problems for North Carolina. But now that the Tar Heels are fully healthy, I just think they're going to be able to beat West Virginia. Um, but again, JJ Quinterly is really fun to watch. So, and then Vanderbilt and Oregon, Shea Rolfe, I think will have Vanderbilt beating Oregon. I just was not impressed with Oregon this year. They lost to Indiana. So if you do that, you really fucked up. So, but yeah, I have Duke beating Vanderbilt regardless. So, and then North Carolina versus South Carolina. As much as I want to pick the upset, I just can't see South Carolina losing. I think they're another one seed that just will be able to win. And then let's go to the third region, which has Texas. I already have them advanced to the Sweet 16. Illinois versus Creighton. Um, as much as I want to pick Creighton, I think Illinois is just the better team, I think, overall. Although, again, as I said earlier, and I'll repeat again, like you should probably split your 8-9 matchups between the brackets you make, unless you just have a gut feeling about a particular matchup. But in this case, I think Illinois ends up winning. They'll face Texas. Texas moves on again. Um, Tennessee versus South Florida. I have Tennessee moving on. Ohio State defeats Montana State. And then whew, I as Ohio State, another team that is not that was playing very well, and especially toward the beginning of the year, um, they've really not been able to beat a lot of the better competition. Tennessee, on the other hand, I mean, injury. They do have injuries, but they also have really good talent. It's going to be tough to pick Tennessee and Ohio State, even if it is at Ohio State. I just have a strange feeling Tennessee's going to win this game. Ohio State may be the more likely to win, especially because is at Ohio State, and Jelani Cambridge and Cody McMahon are amazing. But I just think Tennessee may end up pulling this one out. I have a weird feeling that Tennessee's going to make a deep run, which is why I have them upsetting Texas. Yeah. Yeah, so I think if either Ohio State or Tennessee ends up moving to the Sweet 16, I think they could upset the Longhorns. I Of the one seeds, I think Texas might be the one I'm the least yeah, probably the least willing to move to the final four, I would say. So in that case, I let's move down to the bottom of the region. Michigan, I have not only defeating the winner of Iowa State and Princeton, but I also have them beating Notre Dame. I have them pulling off that upset because a couple of reasons. One, Notre Dame has not been playing very well as of late. Number two, I think Michigan with they have really talented freshmen that could be very well be able to beat Notre Dame. It's not a far drive from Ann Arbor to South Bend, but yeah, Notre Dame, I think, kind of got screwed a little bit with their seeding because I think Michigan can very much pull off the upset. So Silas Swords, Olivia Olson, and what's her? Yeah, Hobbs as well. I think Michigan just has a really good shot to beat Notre Dame. So yeah, that's who I have in that region. Then TCU, I think, ends up advancing to the Elite Eight. I just really like this TCU squad. I have them beating Fairleigh Dickinson in the first round, and then Louisville. I think the Haley Van Lith matchup it does end up happening. I have Louisville defeating Nebraska. I think Louisville's just the better team talent wise, and then I have TCU advancing to the Elite Eight where there will be Tennessee over TCU. That's right. I've gone mad with power. I have South Carolina versus Tennessee in the Final Four. Um, so yeah, we'll get to that game in a little bit, but yeah. So California versus Mississippi State of the two of those two teams, I think California, which it'll set up a Pac-12 rematch between USC versus California. I have USC moving on. Surprise, surprise. UConn over. I mean, I'm going to the bottom of the bracket. Yeah, but yeah, I have UConn advancing to the Sweet 16 regardless. So, and then South Dakota State, I do have beating Oklahoma State. So, I do have UConn beating two double-digit seeds to advance. Um, I have Kentucky defeating Liberty, and then Kentucky ends up advancing to the Sweet 16 um, over Kansas State as well. Even though Kansas State's a very interesting matchup with Lee and Sundell, but I just don't. I don't think Kentucky's losing, especially with at least especially because it's in Lexington. So as a top four seed, and then I have USC moving on against Kentucky. As much as I like Georgia Amore and Kentucky has a lot of really good players outside of her, but they're not. I just don't think they're beating USC. Um, and then Iowa, I have beating Murray State, and then upsetting Oklahoma in Norman. I like Reagan Beers and Peyton Verhulst, but I for some reason I think Iowa is going to bounce back and beat um and make a Sweet 16 run. I think they do end up losing to UConn, but I think Lucy Olson and Hannah Stolke um and oh God, what's her face like Kylie Feuerbach and um I'm completely blanking on her name. Oh my gosh. Yeah, forgive me. I'm I've been talking for quite a while. Um, but yeah, I just think that it's going to be a USC versus UConn matchup, and then I have USC moving on to face UCLA. I do have 3-1 seeds in the Final Four. I know that's a little bit boring, but like, come on, like I'm not really. I did have one seed in the Final Four, so there is that. Um, yeah, so then I have USC. I've said this all year long. I have USC as my national champion. I think USC is going to get their revenge for the Big Ten title game. It's so weird saying that for UCLA and USC, but I do have USC moving on to the national championship game. They will go 3-1 this year against UCLA. They will face South Carolina, who will end Tennessee's run in the Final Four. I think Don Staley does make the national championship game again. Um, and then yeah, USC again. But You could have UConn moving on too, but I just think USC is the better team than UConn is overall. Um, yeah, I do. It'll be nice to see a Paige Beckers Juju Watkins matchup again. So, um, yeah. So they're four. I have USC winning it all against South Carolina in the national title game. Yeah, there you have it. I have on the men's side it's Duke, and on the women's side it's USC. Yeah, there you go. Those are my perfect brackets. Let's go. So yeah, that's basically it. Once again, I'll have um, I'll have recaps for the games that end up happening. I'm not sure how I'm going to do it quite yet, but just know that to expect some podcast episodes after the games. So very excited to see how my brackets do. I'm going to have so many different outcomes for each bracket, and hopefully you should too, because no one's getting a perfect bracket this year. No one may ever get a perfect bracket, but we can at least try. And those were my attempts at getting a perfect bracket. And the other 40, yeah, the other 48 brackets that I end up filling out because I am a madman. So, anyway, good luck to everyone who's filling out their brackets, whether it's for fun or it's in an office pool or with friends. Yeah, just hopefully this episode gave you a little bit more of an edge as to what upsets to look for, what teams to look out for in terms of which teams to trust and whatnot. So hopefully this helped you a little bit, even if you're just filling out one, and even if you get every single matchup wrong, just know that there are millions upon millions of other people who did just as well as you. So anyway, thanks so much for listening. I cannot wait for the games to start, especially with the first four starting on Tuesday. um, yeah, I mean, it would have been cool to have Indiana in the tournament on the men's side, but again, just glad this era, glad the Mike Woodson era is over, and we can move on. And hopefully, Indiana will be in future tournaments. The copium is very high with a new head coach. Hopefully, maybe it's Will Wade at this point, even though you know, we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to hop off now, but again, enjoy the NCAA tournament, and I will see you all next time to break down the first round action and potentially the first four action. We'll see. But again, I will see you all at some point later this week, and it's going to be a pretty fun tournament regardless. So thanks again for listening. I will see you all next time. Bye bye.